blanket bottle. We were lying down on Alec's living room carpet. The tent had a big idea. It was cold and we'd run out of water and none of us wanted to be outdoors. So we stumbled inside. We must have done, I guess, I don't remember it happening. I just remember Alan muttering something about his mom being away with family for a few days. Which was weird, because why wouldn't you be with your son on his birthday? Daniel fell asleep again on the sofa, and Aled and I huddled up on the floor. We had blankets on top of us, and all the lights were off, and all I could see of Aled's was his pale eyes, and all I could hear was the low rumble coming from the skyscraper radio. I couldn't quite believe how much I seriously loved Aled last. Even if it wasn't the ideal way you would make it socially acceptable for us to live together until we die. Ali rolled over, so he was facing me. Did you hang out with Harry much? He asked, his voice barely above a murmur. Apart from on the train. We didn't talk. We hadn't talked about Carrie before. We weren't really friends, to be honest, I lied. We hung out when I was in year 10, but we weren't really friends. Allie kept looking at me. There was a slight twitch on his eyebrows. I wanted to ask why he never sat with his sister on the train to school. I wanted to ask whether Carrie ever spoke about me during the summer when we were all 15. I wanted to ask what she'd said when she got home that night I kissed her. Whether she was still angry at me, whether she told him how she screamed at me, whether she'd said she hated me now, whether she'd always hated me. I wanted to ask whatever he ever heard from her, but I couldn't, so I didn't. I wanted to tell him that it was my fault she was gone. I wanted to tell him that I once had a crush on his sister. And one day I kissed her while she was sad because I thought it was the right thing to do, even though I'd been wrong. You know, Alice's voice faded out, and he didn't speak for a half a minute. My mom won't tell me where she is, or how she is. What? Why not? She doesn't want me to see her. My mom hates her. I mean, properly hates, not just parental disapproval or whatever. My mom never wants to see her again. That's really messed up. Sometimes I was hit by the weight of all the things I didn't know. Not just about Carrie, but about everything. Anything and everything. What's it like to have a parent you don't like, or who doesn't like you? What's it like to run away from home? I don't know. I'll never know. I'll always feel awful about not knowing. I think it might have been my fault, I said. What was? Carrie's running away. Allie frowned. What? Why? Why would you say that? I needed to tell him. I said, I kissed her. I ruined our friendship. Allie blinked, startled. What? What? Huh? Did you? I nodded and breathed out and felt like I just jumped over the ocean. That's it. That's it. That's it. What? That's it. It wasn't your fault, he said. That wasn't. He cleared his throat. It's not your fault. I hated myself. I hated myself so much I wanted to sink into the floor and fall into the earth's core. I'm not friends with you because of her, I said. I didn't think you were. He hugged me then. It was a bit difficult, as we were both lying on the floor, but basically we went from being two separate blanket bottles to being one gigantic blanket bottle. I don't know how long we stayed like that. I hadn't checked my phone for ages. Then he said, do you think we'll be famous one day? And I said, I don't know. I don't think I really want to be famous. I guess it's stressful. People trying to work out our identities all the time. The film, they're insane. Beautiful and passionate, but insane. I smiled. It's kind of fun. We're part of something, a giant mystery. He smiled back. We are part of some gigantic mystery. Do you want to be famous? I just want to be special. You are special. He laughed and said, shut up. Dark blue. The next thing I remember is waking up on the carpet, freezing cold in the dark. Maybe it was 3 a.m., maybe 4 a.m. My mouth tasting like something you'd use in a chemistry lesson. Everything around me dead, dust floating in the air, Alad and Daniel gone. I desperately needed to pee. So I got out of the bottle. So I got out of the bundle of blankets and wandered out of the room toward the bathroom, but stopped immediately when I heard voices coming from the kitchen. They didn't see me in the doorway because it was almost completely dark. I could barely see them either. They were just slightly moonlight splotches, but I didn't really need to. They were sitting at the dining table, Alad with his head on his arm, Daniel with his chin in one hand, looking at each other. Daniel took a sip from his bottle. That might have been wine. I wasn't sure. There was a long pause before either of them said anything. Yeah. But it's not about people knowing, said Alad. It's not about anyone else. I literally don't care what anyone else thinks about it. You've quite clearly have been avoiding me, said Daniel. We've barely seen each other all summer. You were busy. You were working. Yeah, but I made time for you if you wanted me to. You just didn't seem like you wanted me to. I do want you to. They can't just tell me what the issue is. Daniel sounded annoyed, and his voice got even quieter. There's not an issue. If you don't like me, just say it. There's no point in lying. Well, obviously I like you. I mean, like that. Alex raised his free hand and poked out Daniel on the arm, but as he replied, he seemed to be taking almost entirely to himself. Well, why would we do this if I didn't like you like that? Daniel was staying quiet still. Oh, exactly. I think that's when I realized what was happening. Seconds before it happened, I don't even remember feeling surprised. I don't know what I felt. Maybe a bit lonely. And Alec raised his hand and lifted his arms. Daniel leaned into them and rested his head on Alec's chest and hugging him tightly, rubbing a hand slowly across Daniel's back. When they drew apart, Alec sat there, waiting for it to happen. Daniel lifted a hand and ran it through Alec's hair, saying, "You need a haircut," and then leaned in some more and kissed him. I turned around. I didn't want to see it anymore. I woke up sometime later on the carpet, freezing in the dark, and Alec was breathing like he was an astronaut, running out of oxygen, sitting up next to me, with his head bent forward and his face completely covered by his hands. Daniel wasn't there. Alec kept breathing and holding his head, and I sat up and put my hand on his shoulder and said, "Alec?" But he didn't even look at me. He just kept shaking, and I suddenly realized that he was crying. I tried to move so he could look at me, and I said Alad again, but nothing happened. And then he made a really horrible moaning noise, and it just wasn't crying. This was much worse. This was the crying where you want to scratch your eyes out and smash the wall. And I couldn't stand it. I can't even stand it when other people cry, especially like this. I put my arms around him and held him, and his whole body was shaking. I don't even know what else to do. So I just stayed like that and said, "What's wrong?" probably a billion times, but he just kept shaking his head, and I don't even know what that meant. When I managed to get him to lie down, I asked it again, and he just said, I'm sorry. 8 minutes later, he said, "I don't want to go to university." And I looked at him like he might still have been crying when I fell asleep. The next time I looked up, Daniel was on the sofa inside his sleeping bag. He was cramped up under the stars. I realized suddenly that Daniel was February Friday. Of course he was. Secret romance, childhood best friend. Could this get any more romantic? Not that I knew anything about that stuff. I I thought I'd feel happy about finally knowing, but I didn't feel anything. I looked up at the ceiling, half expecting to find some stars there, but there wasn't any at all. I needed to pee again urgently, so I sat up and glanced at Aled, who was asleep again, lying next to me on the floor, his head turned toward me, one hand curled under his cheek, and I squinted and I thought that the skin under his eye was kind of purple, which was weird because I suppose I might have been the light, which seemed to be stuck in a permanent state of dark blue. 2. Summer Holiday. B. The worst episode. I'd woken up at sleepovers many times before, but never with someone sleeping with their arms around me, which was what Aled was doing when I woke up at 11:34 a.m. the next day, which felt like a fireworks display happening inside my brain. I didn't remember a lot, but I did remember that Aled and Daniel were a thing. Daniel was February Friday. Aled had started crying for no reason, and we recorded and posted a drunk episode of University. I felt like something bad had happened, even though nothing had. When I got back into the den with a bowl of cereal, Aled and Daniel were sitting next to each other on the floor. I wondered whether they had some kind of argument last night, which would explain Aled's random breakdown. But then they were almost leaning on each other, watching a video on Aled's phone. It took me 2 seconds to realize what it was. I sat down next to them and watched in silence. When I had finished, Daniel said, "Well, that's embarrassing." Aled said, "The worst episode we have ever made." I said, "Look at the views." The views were normally around 5 or 6,000 for a new episode. We were at 30,327.